Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to show you my attempts at saving this eucalyptus tree, which was about to be blown over by the wind. So we've saved it already, going completely over, but what we need to do is get it back upright and make sure it survives the next few storms that come along. So you can use this video if you want as a bit of a guide as how to do it yourself, but the only thing I would say is be extremely cautious with trees, especially the larger they get. You really don't want to be working underneath them, and they could easily topple over and seriously injure you or kill you. Also with trees, once you do self-right them, they will get their roots back down, but they'll never be as strong as they were. So there's always a risk that they can get blown over in the wind in the future. So you'll always have to be a bit careful around that tree when it's windy, and also if it's near a property, you're probably just best cutting the tree down and starting again with a new tree. So this here is my eucalyptus tree. This is about 9 years old now. So eucalyptus trees, they do have quite extensive root systems, but they're very surface growing, and the problem is where they grow in the wild is very poor soil in the Australian outback. This particular one comes from Tasmania and is actually frost and snow hardy. This is Eucalyptus gunnii. But what happens is they're used to quite poor soils, and when they're grown in rich garden soils, they don't put down a lot of roots compared with the amount of top growth, so they grow very fast, very lush, and the roots aren't big enough to support them. So over the last few years we've been trying to get this one to thicken up its trunk so it didn't get snapped off in the strong winds, because we can have 100-mile-an-hour winds here, and its trunk is plenty strong enough now, but the root system is just not big enough to support the top half when the strong winds come. And as an evergreen tree, it has a lot of leaves that can get caught by the wind. So this one has been leaning quite precariously. It would have fallen over completely if it wasn't for these two metal stakes. These are put in the ground about 2 foot deep and are holding it at the moment. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it back upright, and I'm going to severely reduce the amount of foliage on it. So the problem at the moment is if we put it back upright, it's just going to get blown over again. There's too much foliage, and that's going to act as a sail and pull it over. So what I need to do is I basically need to pollard it, take a lot of the height off, because around here with a few other trees and shrubs and the polytunnel, most of the garden's fairly sheltered until about 4 meters in height, and then it gets really battered by the wind. So if we can bring it down to about 4 meters or less, that will really help. And I just want to take off a lot of the branches that are hanging out to the side as well, so there's less leverage. So reduce the height, reduce the width, bring it right down. It might not resprout as nicely, because when you cut eucalyptus down hard, what tends to happen is it regrows and it gets really bushy. So it will look a bit odd for a few years, but that's the first step I need to do anyway. Take the weight off it. That will also make it easier for me to self-right it. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be pulling it back upright. I'll be making sure it's well anchored in so they can stabilize, and it's very important that it stays still whilst it's rerouting. Otherwise what will happen is as the roots are being pulled and rocked in the wind, it'll rip the roots out and it will not let the roots grow, and so it will always have loose roots. So I'll show you a close up now. I know it's safe as it's been very windy earlier and it hasn't shifted since we put these stakes in, and now it's actually not very windy compared with what it was. But you can see here the root system's really starting to lift up there. These slabs were all completely flat, so if I go down here you'll really see how much that these have lifted up. There's quite a bit of height gain on the left there, so the whole root plate is starting to lift. We have got some roots that go further into the vegetable plot. You can see these roots run underneath the slabs and go elsewhere, so it really has got a lot of a root system starting to get poured up. So hopefully not too many roots have snapped, and it's just pulling up some of the roots, and we can put it back in and there won't be too much damage to the roots. But with any kind of tree that's tipped like this, you will have snapped some roots, and it's never going to be as stable as it was, so you always have to be a little bit careful. You can see here there's quite a pronounced lean. This had a very slight lean originally, but the lean is much more pronounced than before, and it's just really been rocking at the base, and the only thing holding it up is these stakes at the moment. So what I'll do now is I'll go get my pruning tools. I'll be using a very long pruning saw and telescopic loppers, so I can work with this safely from a distance, and I'll always be trying to stay on the upside, so if it does ever fall down whilst I'm working on it, it's not going to end up falling on top of me. So what I need to do, as I say, is reduce a lot of the top growth, take off the weight, and then it'll come to the time to try and self-right this. So that's most of the foliage now taken off and a lot of the weight. Now we'll probably have to take more off, but what I don't want to do is take too much off now. What I want to do next is put it up into its standing position. Once it's in its standing position, I'll get a better idea of where the branches are and the general shape of the tree, and then I can continue with the pruning at that stage. If I did it all now and I put it upright and it's going to be really lopsided, I'd have to cut it back even harder. I don't want to lose too much of the tree if I can help it. So I'd also like to talk about the tool that I'm using. So this video isn't sponsored by Wolfgarten at all. They haven't sent me any of the products and they haven't asked me to review any of them, but I'll add an affiliate link into the description if you want to buy one yourself, and if you do purchase through Amazon, I'll get a small percentage as a commission. So this is the tools that I'm using anyway. I've been using these for several years now as a professional gardener, and if you want to do any kind of tree pruning, this is a fantastic tool. With an A-frame or a tripod ladder, you can get up to heights of probably 6 or 8 meters with these tools. So this tool will allow you to get basically 2 to 4 meter extension. So that's the extension there. So if you're on top of a tall ladder and you add your body height as well, you can get some surprisingly tall roots on this. So I've never really come across many trees that I can't handle, apart from the really big ones, which I then get a tree surgeon for. So this is really handy. As I say, it's telescopic, so you can adjust the length of it. At full extension, it can be a little bit wobbly, but apart from full extension, it's quite sturdy. At the moment, this isn't on full extension, it's just about 1 foot down from it. What I love about this is it comes with 2 nice tools, or you can buy them individually. So the top here I have some loppers. The really good thing about these loppers is that they've got a pulley system, so you can see there's lots of string here for the pulley system. That means they've got really nice gearing on them. So what you do is you position that onto the branch that you want to cut. You then have this very long adjustable string. The handle is adjustable, so depending on the length of your pole, you can adjust the length of where the handle is. So it's really nice and ergonomic in that matter. So all you need to do is pull on that string. You don't need to pull that hard, because there's so much leverage on this with the pulley system. You can cut some really thick branches, so that's really handy for that. Also, it's got a really strong spring, so it can really easily open up again. It doesn't get stuck shut, which is a nice feature. If you're doing any kind of sappy trees, that's quite a nice feature to have. The other thing that's really nice is the saw. What I love about this is that you can take it off, so I can use this as a hand saw if I want to. It's very large, but I can use this as a pruning saw just as it is, or I can use it on the pole. What's really nice about this for pole cutting though is it's got a stop at the end there, so when you're sawing, you just use gravity to do the sawing. You go forwards and backwards, it doesn't fall off and you don't have to keep repositioning it. And at this end there's a very sharp blade, so what you can do is you can work around the base of the cut and make sure it doesn't rip off any of the bark, so that's really good for undercutting. But anyway, that's the tools. As I say, I really like this product. Not sponsored technically, but with an affiliate link. If you do purchase the product through the affiliate link, I'll get a small commission. So that's what I've been using anyway. Keep a nice safe distance to prune it back. So now it's time to self-right this. Before I do that, I'd like to show you some pruning techniques, and just to make sure you get some nice clean cuts on your tree and you don't get any damaged branches. So I'd like to use this branch as an example. So just imagine this isn't in my hand, this is on a pole pruner. What you want to do is when you cut it off, especially with some trees like eucalyptus, is you don't want to cut this off in the midpoint here. If you cut it off here and there's no branches nearby, what's going to happen is, because this is the highest point of the tree, all the hormones are going to get concentrated on that point, and that's the point where the tree will want to grow the most. What will happen is you'll get masses of growth coming out and it really gets congested. So what you want to do is you want to cut it off just where a branch comes off. That way this branch will continue growing in a more natural way, instead of all the hormones concentrated onto one point, because it's gone from such a thick bit of stem to no stem. It slowly tapers and the hormones will be more equally distributed throughout the stem, and you'll get much nicer, more natural growth. So you want to cut it off at this point here. Now I'll put this at a slight angle like this. So imagine this is the downside of the branch. You always want to see where the downside is. It can be hard if it's perfectly vertical to see where the downside is, but what you want to do is do the majority of the cutting on the top, and you want to start with a bit of cutting at the bottom. The reason you want to do most of the cutting at the top is, as you cut through the bottom part here, what will happen is the gravity will pull the branch down as you're creating a gap in the wood, and what that will do is it will trap your blade and you won't be able to saw anymore. So you want to cut mostly at the top, and as you cut, that gap will open up and it'll get easier and easier to cut it. Now before you cut, the reason you have to do a bottom cut is otherwise it will rip and you'll actually pull a lot of the bark off and you'll create a huge amount of damage to your tree. So what you want to do is, if you've got a blade like this, what you can do is just ram that in really hard around the base, just like this, to cut the stem. I'm just going to do it on this higher section as it's easier to demonstrate. You can see there,
it can cut it in, or you can push and actually glide it around like that as well. A bit more control. But what I'm going to show you, because most saws don't come with this, is I'm just going to cut the base down here. So going in, I'm just going to start by pushing away, then slowly pulling back, just cutting a bit in like that. And then the majority of the rest of the cut, I'm just going to try and line it up. I'm just going to cut like this. And then with gravity, as you can see, it's starting to lean, it's getting easier to cut, and it will just come off like that. You'll have a nice clean cut. Occasionally you might need to go in and just clean it up a bit, but it just leaves you with a nice clean cut there. And as long as there's not too much above where the side branch comes off, you won't get all that ugly reshooting. The hormones that are going up this stem will suppress any growth coming from the cut, so you get a much nicer appearance to your tree. So what I'll do now is I'll get a branch and I'll show you what happens if you don't do that cut on the side. So I'll use this one here as an example. So there'll be a lot of weight pulling this branch down. So what will happen is as you start cutting on this bit here, what you'll find is it starts to tip over and it will start pulling on the bark. So I'll just do it a bit there and demonstrate it as if it's a slightly heavier branch than it is, and you can see it'll start to break like that. You won't get a nice clean cut, so even before you actually finish cutting through the wood, it's already starting to pour down and damage and get an ugly rip. So I keep going like that. You'll see it starting to just naturally fall, and what will happen is as it falls down, gravity will take it and it will just pull down, and what you end up with is a really bad rip on your main stem like that. So the problem with this is if it's left, you've got an open wound now, rot can get in, that will really struggle to heal up. It could be a major issue in the future as the rot goes into the main trunk of the tree and your tree could fall over because the rot damage to the main trunk. So always make sure you do that undercut so you don't get that nasty tear.
So now it's ready to get this tree righted. Now if you have a winch or some kind of ratchet system or pulley system, that would be ideal. What you want to do is secure a rope as high as you can safely get it on the tree. Obviously you don't want to climb up the tree because it's going to be quite precarious. You don't want to get too close, so ideally you can lasso it. What you could do is cut off a branch in such a way that you can easily lasso a rope onto it, get a good anchor point. Now you want to do it higher up because the higher it up you pull it, the more leverage you've got, and it'll be much easier to self-right the tree. So we'll be doing that here, but we won't be able to use a pulley system. I don't have a pulley system or ratchet system, so we're just going to be using manpower and a few weights as well to help us out. So we're going to pull it upright again. Once it's upright, we're going to try and stake it in place so it doesn't move and wobble. This is definitely more than a one-man job. Now in this instance, I know this tree is quite stable. I'm an expert when it comes to gardening and pruning, so I know it's safe for me to now work underneath this tree. But never work under a tree that's leaning unless you are an expert and you know what you're doing, because tree work can be extremely dangerous. So what we're going to do now is get this self-righted. We're going to put some weight as well on the slabs down here. That weight will not only help us to pull this tree up, it will help to push the roots and the soil back to the level that they were previously. And what we'll probably do is keep a heavy weight down there to aid in some of the rocking of the tree and to help that soil slowly settle and go back to its original position. So that's the eucalyptus now back up in relatively its original position. Now we can't put it completely straight, the reason being it was already leaning, and if we were to put this central stem right at the bottom here to a vertical position, what would happen is it would rip up the roots on the right hand side, and that would make it even more unstable and we'd have even more root damage. So this is about the position we want. What I will do with this tree eventually, because what happens in this garden is we get a lot of strong winds from the west. You can see we're getting a westerly right now. We nearly always get westerly winds here. Is the whole tree always tries to lean to the side, so we've been pruning it to keep it upright. So in the future we will reduce this down to just one stem instead of the two main trunks that it has at the moment. So we'll just have that more vertical one on the left there, the one behind on the right we'll remove, and that'll keep it a bit more straight. So all that's left to do now is, now that I've got it upright, I can see the general shape a bit better. There's a few branches which have been damaged in putting up some of the guy ropes to straighten it. So you can see there's one there which is ripped, so that'll need to come off towards the base of where it joins the other stem, just so that we don't get any rot starting to get into there. And I'll just have a look at the general shape of the tree and maybe take off some of these ones that are a little bit sticking out to the side and just thin it out slightly and take off any dead or damaged material, and then that should be pretty much it. I think that'll be it upright and ready to grow for the summer. So looking forward here, what we've had to do is we've had to lift these slabs. We'll put them back down now. These other slabs are still quite raised. These should go down over the next few months, but they will take time. So what we've done is we've got this massive plant pot here. We filled it with heavy stones. That should hopefully sink over the next few weeks. We've double guyed this with the original stakes down there, which, as I say, was about 2 foot deep. And then we've also got this brace at the side here. So I'm not too worried about the wind direction from the other two directions, from the north and the south. We don't really get strong north or southerly winds in this particular garden. But if it does look like it's going to start moving, I will then brace it in that direction. But the main thing is we've got the westerly winds protected, because that's where the roots are loose. If we get an easterly, these roots will be able to hold, it won't wobble. And if it loosens slightly at the stake we put in, that will just slip further down and it won't completely fall because the angle it's at, it will just wedge into the tree. And we've had to put in a bolt bag there just as padding, because if this wood is to go directly up against the tree trunk, it will damage it, and we definitely don't want to be damaging that tree trunk there, otherwise we'll get other issues with rot and things like that. So that's my process for self-righting this tree, which is wind damaged. You can also use this technique for trees that are completely blown down. As I say, if you have winches and things like that, it will make it easier, but any of this work is extremely dangerous. You've got the problem of trees falling on you, you've got ropes under high tension which can snap and ping off and damage you or property. So if you do this, take extreme caution and only do it if you know what you're doing. So it's now the end of spring, and I'd like to show you the progress with the eucalyptus so far. So as you can see, there's nothing much to see from a distance. All that's really happened is a lot more of the leaves have gone brown with our harsh winters that we have here and the strong salt winds. But there is actually a lot of new growth starting. So underground there will be quite a lot of root growth going on right now, and it should be stabilizing itself. As you can see, we still have all the straps and ties on it, holding it steady, because we really need to make sure that it's well rooted before we take them off. But there's definite signs of new growth. So there's not a lot of new growth signs on the original branches. You can see up here, there's a tiny bit just starting there, but there's really not much at all. But there's a lot of epicormic growth, so basically dormant buds starting to burst, and this is very common for eucalyptus, and it will make retraining it a little bit awkward. So basically eucalyptus comes from a fiery environment where they have periodic wildfires, so when it gets damaged it just resprouts from all over. So you can see down the bottom here we've got some new epicormic growth coming through, really quite low down on the trunk. So these will have to be cut off to make sure that we don't end up with a weird shrubby mess instead of a tree. But you can see all over the place, lots of new shoots coming up. So there's also a few starting up towards the top as well. Right up the top there's some new growth starting to appear. And we've also got a few other places as well where there's new growth. So you can see up here on the branches, a little new shoot just coming out where that old branch was cut off from. So things are starting to happen, it's starting to recover. It will be a slow process. With this eucalyptus in my climate, what tends to happen is it puts on very little growth in the beginning of the year, and then it really puts on the strong growth kind of July, August time. So I'll come back to you guys later in the summer and we'll see how much growth there is. I suspect there'll be loads and loads of new growth coming out of all the old stems, so then I'll have to start thinking about selectively pruning it to keep that nice shape instead of having a really bushy looking shrub instead of a tree. But so far looking good. It's definitely survived. When we self-righted it, it hasn't lost too many roots, and it's starting to resprout, so it means that most of the roots are still in a decent condition and it's going to survive. It's just a matter of how much it's going to grow and how long it's going to take for it to root strongly enough to keep upright. But I'm quite hopeful, and I should think by the end of summer we'll be able to take off the supports and we'll have quite a nice looking tree again. So it's now August, and as you can see the eucalyptus tree has recovered quite nicely. Now we could probably get away with taking away the ropes now, but I'm going to leave it right until the end of the growing season just to make sure that its roots are fully established. But as you can see, there's a lot more leaves now and it's really started to resprout. So the leaves that have regrown from the existing branches that were left, they're in the adult stage, so you can see that's like the mature foliage. It's mostly a pale green colour and the leaves are quite long and oblong, whereas up the top where there's been reactive growth coming out of the main stems, that foliage is still in the juvenile foliage, and so that's a lot rounder and it's more of a turquoisey blue colour. So I can definitely show you that much clearer down the base. So there's been a lot of reactive growth or epicormic growth from here at the base. This is what I'm going to be cutting off today. This is juvenile foliage. You can see the leaves are kind of wrapped around the stem, and they really are much more of a turquoise or even a blue colour, silvery colour. So that's what the young foliage looks like, and that will transition to a more mature type of foliage later on. But as you can see, the tree's not looking too bad. Some of these branches are getting a bit heavy now because what's happened is it's grown a lot of new leaves and a lot of new foliage, so these branches are starting to get a bit heavy. So what I'll need to do is give them a trim once it's leafed out a bit more, because these are probably going to snap off in the winter winds anyway. So what I'm going to do is leave these long dangling branches, cut them off just before the strong winter winds come, and then they'll have spent the whole summer powering the growth for that new growth at the top there. And then next year I can think about selectively pruning this and getting it to a nicer shape. So as you can see, it has recovered quite nicely and it's looking much better. So I'll see you now at the end of the year when I'm just doing a little bit of pruning off some of these long branches, and also the bottom of the stem will be nicely cleared as well, and it'll start to become a bit more even looking and start to look like it used to as a nice specimen tree. So it's now right at the end of the growing season. It's October time, so I'm not expecting much more growth, but as you can see, it's done quite well over the summer. It's put on a lot of new growth. A lot of that growth was the epicormic growth that came out of the trunk, but there's also quite a bit of other growth which wasn't like that, so it doesn't actually look too bad. I thought it might have been a bit more bushy and unusual looking, but it's actually looking pretty good, so I'm quite happy with how it's responded. I've also checked the root systems, they're nice and firm now, so what I'll be doing today is I'll be taking off the support. I don't think it will need it anymore, and I'll be also reducing the canopy a little bit more. The reason being, we're coming into winter now, and I'm just a bit worried that with winter coming up, as the strong winds coming back, it's still got quite a lot of foliage and its roots won't be fully established yet, so I just want to take off a bit of that foliage to make it a bit easier for it to support itself, and also just even it up a bit. So you can see we've got this very long branch on the left here which really sticks out to the side. I just want to shorten that and bring it in a little bit. Also, because of where we live, we get some very strong westerly winds predominantly, so the left hand side tends to die off a lot and the right hand side grows a lot more, so I need to take off some of the weight from the right hand side to even up any extra growth that it might be putting on the right instead of the left, and also because that's the direction it fell previously, so I want to have as little weight on the right hand side as possible to try and even it up a bit. We can't get rid of this angle at the very bottom of the trunk now, that's kind of permanent, not much we can do about that, but we can certainly get rid of that trunk on the right hand side and it'll make the whole tree look a lot straighter. So I'm just going to go up on the ladder now. I'm going to start trimming the tree, reduce it in size, and then I'm going to think about cutting off some of that back section. I'll see how it goes. I'll take it off bit by bit. If I'm happy to go ahead and take off that whole trunk, I'll do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to take it down a little bit and we'll maybe take off that lower trunk at a later date. So that's most of the pruning done for now. So I haven't gone for pruning to make it look nice. I've gone for pruning that's going to make the plant stronger in the long run and also protect it this winter by not having as much foliage to catch the wind. So I've taken it off a bit on the left. I've taken off quite a lot on the right where that extra weight was going to pull it over. Now I've also taken off some of the dangling branches. There's a couple more dangling branches here. I'm going to leave them for now. I don't want to go too hard with taking off a lot of the foliage as we're coming into winter. And it's an evergreen tree, so it will keep a lot of its foliage. So what I'll be doing is I'll be leaving them for now. They might get damaged during the storms, we'll just see what happens, but they'll be coming off at some point. They're quite weak stems, they're very heavy with foliage, they're not really going to come to much, and they're just going to have downward facing branches, so they'll be removed. All the growth at the top looks quite good, and a lot of the epicormic growth which has started to grow out from the side, some of that is also looking quite healthy as well. So the plan is I will let this grow over the next few years, selectively prune it, and we'll get it back into a nice looking tree. Now there is a little bit more pruning I need to do to get that effect, so I'll go around the side now and I'll show you it. So ideally, as I said, I just want this left limb here left and the right one taken out, because although it doesn't look like it from this angle, from the other side you can see it is sticking out at quite an angle, and it'll just leave it as a nice single stem tree. The problem with having forks in the tree like this here is you can have a weak connection between the two forks where it splits, and that can cause issues in the future. So if I take that one off, just allow it to be one trunk, that should help negate that. So what I need to do is I need to encourage more branches to grow from this left hand side trunk towards the right hand side. Now at the moment there's not many branches doing that because the other side was full of foliage. So what I need to do is remove some of the foliage on this right hand side trunk that's facing into the left. That will allow more light to get into the canopy. That will encourage the branches that are on the left hand side trunk to grow faster and larger and fill in that space. and it will also encourage some new branches to appear from the main trunk as well, as it will be getting more light. So I'm just going to go ahead now and take off a lot of these inner branches on the right hand side trunk. It might look a bit strange, but this will help it in the long run. It means the left hand side trunk will have an even branch structure, and it means when I remove this right hand side trunk, it's going to be a nice shaped tree with just a single trunk, and it's not going to have an empty side where that other one used to be blocking it. So that's that pruning now complete, and so we will hopefully get some nicer side branches coming along. There is already quite a nice one lower down. It is a bit lower than I would have liked, but I may allow that to grow up, and that could become a nice branch to kind of even up this side of the tree and create a nicer shape again. So I'll take you around to the other side where I've been doing most of it, and I'll just finish off with the conclusion. So that's the tree with all the supports now taken off. It feels fully secure, and I have no worries that this is going to blow over in the wind this winter. The roots have secured nicely over the whole growing season of the summer, and they reduced the crown a lot as well, so it's going to catch a lot less wind. So it's going to be a nice sturdy tree for the next few years. I do have to keep an eye on it though. May have to reduce the canopy when it gets too large again, just because I'm in a very windy location. This tree has had a history of falling over, and its root systems have been weakened from that fall that it had previously. So what I'll be doing, as I say, as the years go on, is I'll be training in the new branches as they come through, selectively pruning other branches, and getting this into a nice shape again. Once it's back into a nice shape, I should be able to leave it pretty much unpruned, and it will look after itself. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys have found it interesting or useful, and have been inspired to save any trees that have fallen over for you. It's just to show that it doesn't matter how big the tree is, it can be saved. You can bring it back up, but the bigger the tree is, the longer it will take. So a very large mature tree might take numerous years for it to regrow its root system. A small tree, it might only be one growing season. So that's all for this video. If you want to see any more interesting videos about plants and trees, please subscribe to my channel, and I've got plenty of videos up already about different plants and trees as well.